Good morning and happy Halloween, everyone. My name is Isan Taylor with I Love the Berg. I'd like to welcome everyone to our next installment of the History Half Hour. These free history tours are made possible in part by the City of St. Petersburg and the St. Petersburg Downtown Partnership, with a special thanks to the St. Petersburg Museum of History. We're about to get started with today's host, Monica Kyle, who's live in front of Sunken Gardens New History Center. Our Wi-Fi reception for the first couple of minutes might be a little glitchy because we're in the trees, but we thank you ahead of time for your patience. Her husband, John Kyle, is in charge of the presentation today, giving us a mix of live footage, historic photos today, and
This
we
is
hope
my
you
on-camera debut, Isa. Come on.
This is, and this,
They're like
you
laughing.
look fabulous. You look fabulous. You have a question during the live tour? Feel free to use the comments. We're going to work on as many as we can during the tour. Once again, thank you for joining us. Be sure to follow I Love the Berg on I can't. It's your costumes are too good. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Subscribe to the newsletter for all things good in the Berg. Over to you, Monica and John.
I think that's probably best since you could barely get your words out, Isa. Hi, everybody. I'm Monica Kyle. So what Isa is laughing about is that I am dressed as Little Red Riding Hood for my Halloween costume, and my husband John is the big bad wolf at home. We are dressed in costume today, of course, because it's Halloween, but also because we are in the historic Old Northeast, which is one of the famous neighborhoods in St. Pete for its elaborate Halloween decorations. So we thought, what better time to do another tour, a second tour of the historic Old Northeast. So we did our first one last year, and ironically, we actually started on 18th Avenue Northeast as well, but way on the other end of the street. And we missed a really cool local historic district in the Old Northeast that we wanted to go back to. So we thought today would be the day. We're going to cover the opening of the really cool new History Center at Sunken Gardens. We're actually joined by Jennifer Tyson from the Sunken Gardens attraction, who's going to tell us a little bit about it. And then we're going to walk down and see the local historic district named Welch's Mediterranean Row. John, actually, why don't you throw up the map of what we're doing and kind of show, and then the second half will be...
I'll stop my camera so that you can see the map.
I can't see you anymore.
So Monica's up at Sunken Gardens, which is where the circle is there. That's 4th Street, the yellow street running north there. Sunken Gardens is that little green area. And we'll zoom in a little, and she's going to wander down 18th Avenue, which kind of disappears behind Sunken Garden there. And she's going to go down 19th, jog down, back down to 18th, do a little bit of 17th, end up down by Poplar. So kind of right through the heart of Halloween Central.
Right. So the second half of the tour, we'll have more of our Halloween decor, and we'll tell you a little bit about the history of how the Old Northeast became so famous for its Halloween decorations. As Isa mentioned, because we're in this luscious setting of Sunken Gardens, the reception may not be great. It may be a little glitchy on the camera footage, and if so, we'll switch to some of our static slides. But the first thing I want to point out about the new History Center at Sunken Gardens is that even though we are standing in front of a gate, this is not a public entrance anymore. Now, it was historically when it opened, this was actually the original entrance. But now this is a private, this is a residential avenue with homes on the other side. And this is only open for, special occasions, let's say. So I know, Jennifer, that's been a bit of a problem, right? What we're going to do is I'm going to switch, give Jennifer one of my AirPods so that you can hear her. And I'm going to ask her a few questions about the new History Center. Okay, John and Isa, can you hear us okay? Jennifer?
Yes, I'm so glad to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Sounding fabulous.
Can you guys hear that? Okay, great.
Sounds
good. Okay, so Jennifer, should we walk in?
Yeah, absolutely. We can walk in this area that's not an entrance gate, just another reminder. But absolutely, this was the original entrance in 1940. This was a step up above the log cabin that the Turner's Sunken Gardens had just beyond this building, just on the other side of what is now our flamingo habitat. They had a log cabin, they were selling fruits and vegetables, and in 1940, the Sunken Gardens was really starting to take off. People were coming here much more for the plants that the Turners had planted than the fruits and vegetables that they were selling at their log cabin stand. And so they created this building that they talked about at length, and it's here today. It was, used for many other purposes over the decades, but we knew we wanted to restore it, bring it back to its former glory, and really share and showcase the history that is so rich here.
And what's in it now? I know because I came here the other day, but I want you to tell the audience a little bit about what's in it.
Right. So inside this History Center, we have some amazing photographs and documents that have never been seen before that really tell how many times Sunken Gardens almost was no more. There were a lot of hard times in the midst of all the great, fun, kitschy times. And so some of those photos show those amazing times with celebrities coming in as well. So you've got the ups and the downs over 100 years of family ownership, as well as some really phenomenal home movies, home videos from the 50s and 60s that really help tell this rich story that people can, kind of go down memory lane with or experience for the first time and understand what a gem we have in St. Pete.
And that's what I had done some research, so I knew about the history of Sunken Gardens. What I was really sort of touched by was the love letters between George and Eula. So if you would give us just the brief history of Sunken Gardens, its founding, and then it's 100 years under the same family's ownership.
Absolutely. So harkening back to the love letters that you mentioned. So George and Eula Turner were young adults at the time of their marriage in 1906. And George was a plumber. He was just a regular guy. Eula was the daughter of a grove owner. And so they really were salt of the earth people. But George had come from a farm background. So he really loved gardening and plants, as did Eula. And so these love letters really show their courtship and how they fell in love with each other, in large part over their love of plants and this dream of someday creating this private oasis, this grove of their own. And little did they know that this property that they purchased as really a backyard garden would become this natural national attraction. And we do have those letters inside. Their granddaughter, Kathy Turner Lee, she's one of our current volunteers, and she came on board a few years ago. She actually grew up right across the street. Yeah. She came on board with us a few years ago and had some amazing the letters, the home videos. She just had some amazing artifacts that really helped put the story together for us as well. I mean, it's been over 100 years to get lost in the shuffle, and so we were very thankful that she found those and shared them.
Oh, as a historian, it really helped me a lot with some missing pieces. So they buy the property in 1911. It becomes an attraction proper in 1936, and then they open this in 1940. And then they build, I'll show some pictures in just a minute. George Sr. leases a large portion of his property to what becomes the public sanitary market. So it became the largest indoor market in the Southeast, which I find kind of funny because now St. Pete has the largest outdoor market in the Southeast with the Saturday morning market. But it fails after a year, and then it becomes the American Legion Armory. And John, show those pictures while I'm mentioning. You have the mic. It becomes the American
we've got
Legion
the pictures
Armory,
up because the video is a little herky jerky. So
okay, okay. It becomes the American Legion Armory, Coca-Cola plant. Then a year entrance and gift shop.
So in the 60s, they purchased the property back, the building back from Coca-Cola Company. The world's largest gift shop, and then included King of Kings Wax Museum. King's Wax Museum was they really wanted to create an indoor, exciting hub that even included a volcano inside, surrounded by restaurants. That didn't go on plans though, and they really turned it into a grand attraction, just as people may remember it, especially from the late 60s and 70s when it had its major heyday and the greatest number of visitors. Other than now, we're really resurging, and now we're right back up at that level.
Well, and I'm gonna try and move us back to where we can get some reception, but it's owned by the same family for 100 years.
Absolutely, the Turner sons and then grandsons.
Right, and I'm gonna talk about them in just a moment. And then we go into city ownership. Jennifer, I'm gonna say thank you to you. Tell people how they can come in and see the History Center.
So the History Center is a part of your general admission as you come to Sunken Gardens. So whether you're a member or a new guests, we'd love to have you. You just come in through the regular main entrance. Come in through the regular main entrance, and it'll be here waiting for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today and letting us peek in the illegal gates. And thank you. Well, I'm sure lots of people are going to want to come see it.
Thank you.
Great. Happy Halloween. Okay. Can you hear me again, John and Isa?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, and I don't know how much video we're getting right now, but Jennifer mentioned that it was owned by the same family for 100 years and that that the granddaughter grew up across the street. She grew up in this house. Actually, she may have been talking about the other house too, but this house directly across the street was built by George Turner Jr. So he was the son, one of the sons of the founder of Sunken Gardens. He bought a house here in 1939, ended up eventually demolishing that, and then having this house built by the famed local architect, Bill Harvard. And John, show those pictures if you can. The cool thing about that house is you can see it takes up most of the lot. So they put the yard, if you will, inside. It had an inner courtyard that all the house was kind of built around. These 3 garages were originally carport, as you can see in that picture there was an article in the St. Pete Times about the house when it was built, because even then Bill Harvard was becoming a pretty well-known architect. There was a house here that has since been demolished that I believe at one point was owned by another of the Turner grandsons. But this next house here at 218th Avenue, this was built by George and Eula Turner. So Jennifer talked a little bit about the love letters between them, and they're really touching if you go into the History Center. They built this house in 1950. So the place that they lived originally was where I think all of us still think of as the Melting Pot. It's going to be a brewery now, but where the Melting Pot is up on 4th Street is where the Turners lived originally. Then they built a house kind of on the back side of the property. And then in 1950, they built this house and lived in it for about 10 years before Eula died. In 1958, I believe Eula died in the house. As so many people did. We're actually going to hear that story a number of times on this tour. You know, back then people didn't go to the hospitals. They convalesced and often passed away at home. And then George Sr., so the founder of Sunken Gardens, passed away in 1961. By that time, he had already originally transferred ownership to his sons, George Jr., who lived in the house that Bill Harvard built, and forget what his other son's name was, but George Turner Jr. then passes the ownership to his 3 sons. And the current owner of this house behind me now was telling me that when they bought the house, they heard, legends of this house is unusual because it has a basement. And at the end of a big day at Sunken Gardens, they would divide the money in the basement into 3 stacks, which I'm assuming they were probably dividing it between the 3 brothers. Because during the 60s and 70s, there was a long period where Sunken Gardens was just a huge attraction. So you can imagine they were probably counting fairly large stacks of money. This is a really nice kind of hidden gem in
for a moment.
Monica, we've lost your audio.
Audio is working.
You're back now.
It dipped out for like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
We're doing great.
Okay. When I was talking about the house,
just as you started walking.
Yes.
So this next couple of blocks just has a lot of lovely 1920s houses. So the Old Northeast was developed largely in the teens and 20s. And it was one of the premier neighborhoods. It was developed originally by Perry Snell, a lot of advertising. There were deed restrictions. Houses had to be a certain size. They had to cost at least $5,000 to build. They had to have a certain number of rooms. They had to face north or south on their blocks unless they were on a corner. They could not have livestock on their property. They had racial restrictions about who was able to live in the main house. It was a very strict effort to make the neighborhood the kind of wealthiest, most premier neighborhood. And the people that lived here really reflected that. So this house was, and Andrew, I don't know if you can tell, but above door there, there's a stone that says 1924. So this house was built in 1924. And at one time, John, you found some information about Dr. Langley that lived here, correct?
Yeah. This was the home for a long time of Dr. Francis Langley, and even some of the people that live on the street now talk about how that was Dr. Langley's house. And he actually came to St. Petersburg at the age of 9. He was born in Ohio, and he went to Johns Hopkins for medical school, and then got the Bronze Star in World War II when he was running a evacuation. He was head of surgery at an evacuation hospital in Europe. Comes back to St. Pete, as the head of surgery at St. Anthony's and Mount Park Hospital. Served on all these medical boards. And he was also a specialist in obstetrics. So presumably he delivered babies for lots of people who were born during his time, and and he died in 1972. So he's one of the people that made this street prominent in the neighborhood.
Well, and the people that live there now are big bird watchers. So they've the yard is meant to cultivate a lot of birds and wildlife, which we saw when we were doing our research. The house behind me here is owned by my very good friends, Jonathan and Sharon Dunford, who actually helped me a lot with research on this tour. So thank you very much, Sharon. It was built in 1937 by a prominent builder, the Schooley Murphy firm, and they built some 400 houses on Snell Isle during the 1920s boom. They were known for their hollow tile houses. That one was actually built in 1937, and I noticed the ownership was transferred directly from Mary Schooley, who had been the wife, to the owner. So I think probably at that point, they're in the middle of the Depression, they're building smaller homes, and they're brokering the deals themselves. It was sold to a man named F.E., I think it was Fred Crosby, who was a hardware salesman from Ashtabula, Ohio. I was having trouble saying that today or this weekend. And he lived there for 14 years until he also died in his house. And my friend Sharon tells me that she hears his ghost sometimes. Perfect for Halloween. Again, very common to pass away in the house. An interesting story, because Andrew, we'll walk over here and check out these decorations. There's a great article, well, not great at the time, I'm sure, in the paper about Fred Crosby's daughter, Laura, who was a teenager, and she was driving a car. Fred was in the front seat, and she crashed the car into the city trolley. And so, John, show that picture. We're going to talk about the city trolley in a minute, but we're starting to get into where you can see some of the great Halloween decorations, and they're going to get more and more elaborate as we move through the tour today. I want to go next to this beautiful Mediterranean revival style house. And I spent a fabulous 2 hours in here the other day with the couple that have owned it since 1967. And their names are Ed and Terry Lockman. And they bought this house in 1967 and negotiated it down to $14,500. And the owner threw in the furnishings, which they still have, like the buffet and several of the other pieces of furniture that came with the house. So the house was originally built in 1926, which is just before the Florida land boom goes bust here. So it's and I'm going to, because I feel like I know them, I'm going to step up on the front steps and show some of the details here. It's a Mediterranean revival style house. The interesting thing about it, and it's got very classic Mediterranean revival style features with the sort of arches over the windows, the arched door, the tile roof, the tiles around the windows. What's interesting is that this elaborate, beautiful front porch entryway is not original. So when they bought the house in 1967, Terry's father was a builder, and I found it to be a very classic Florida story. So they had moved to Florida in the 1950s during the post-World War II boom. He was a builder, a contractor. 47,000 houses were built in St. Pete during the decade of the 1950s. We had an 87% increase in the population. So Terry's father was taking advantage of that boom. When Terry and Ed bought this house, she's got her dad there to help with all the work. So they did a lot of renovation, and they changed. The front door was originally around the corner, and they moved it here to the front. And these columns, which I think are just so beautiful and look like they belong with the house, are actually not original, the porch supports, but they mimic some pillars that actually are inside the house that are original. And John, are you showing that picture yet?
About to put it up.
Okay. So you can see the supports that are inside the house, and you can notice the arches in there. There's a great fireplace inside the house that has a pirate ship. I think you got a picture of that. And that's actually a picture of Ed there in the 60s standing in front of the fireplace. They took me all around the house, and they just had fabulous stories. Ed had worked for the city for several years during the garbage strike in the 1960s. So they were telling me some great stories. My favorite was their headboard above their bed was rather unusual. So I said, what's the story behind the headboard? And it turns out their headboard was doors that came from the home of Walter Fuller, who was a famous real estate developer. He and his father both really responsible for developing large portions of St. Pete. And when Walter Fuller's house out on Park Boulevard sold in the 70s, they sold bits and pieces of it off in parts, and the Lockmans got the doors and made it into their headboard. So, and she had the greatest bathtub I've ever seen, that a cast iron steeping tub, it was called. So a lovely house, beautiful garden, and really I think kind of illustrates the historic homes we often see here in the Old Northeast. Next door to it, we're going to go around the corner actually because they have a pretty great Halloween display. But you'll notice this corner house actually it does not face north or south as they're required to, but it faces east, and that's because it was one of the corner lots. So they were allowed to face either direction, whichever street they wanted to. John, you have some information about the people that own this house.
Yeah, there was a guy that lived in this house named Charles Lenz, and he was a somewhat well-known businessman in town. He had come down from Illinois to start an insurance business, had like 600 brokers at one point, very large, but he ended up specializing in carnival insurance.
Which is actually very fitting with the Halloween display I'm about to show you, John.
True, very true.
Andrew, get a creepy display that they've got this wedding couple, and then I don't know who this is getting toted off by the babies, but she's got her high heels on, so she was going somewhere fancy. Maybe she was a wedding guest. And then you can't miss the woman on the swing who can really give you a scare when you're coming up First Street, because she's quite creepy. Okay, sorry, John, go ahead as we walk down to Welch Mediterranean Row.
So Lenz was a colorful guy. He had bought some PT boats after World War II and used them to sail around in the Gulf and buy turtles that were caught in fishing nets and sell them up north. And just kind of he developed Mullet Key before it became Fort DeSoto. He had the concessionaire contract out there when it became a park. But most interestingly, there's this article where he talks about him insuring elephants. And I have to read this quote. He says, "I got a long distance telephone call from the head of the Republican Club in Cincinnati asking if I would insure these elephants against running amok and hitting someone with their trunks or something else. The Cincinnati Republicans wanted to have elephants in a parade. First thing I asked was the elephant's name. There was nothing very odd about that because there are not too many elephants in the United States. When they told me their names, I knew them. We already insured them for our children to ride on their backs. Very safe elephants." So here's a guy who knew pretty much the names of every elephant in the United States and would insure them based on name. Call up Charles Lenz, tell him your elephant's name, he'll give you your rate, and off you go. He actually ended up retiring, selling his business when he was in his 70s. He moved up to Citrus County, started developing property up there and kind of firing up their chamber of commerce that had laid dormant, and he died at the age of 77 in the 1970s. So anyway, just another colorful character from 18th Avenue there.
Yeah, we could the stories we find when we're researching these houses are fantastic and really give you a picture of the type of people that were living here. Now, many, if not most, of these houses were only occupied during the winter because, of course, this is before air conditioning, and most of them are built during the 1920s boom, including the houses that we're about to see, which are part of, and Andrew, if you could kind of focus on this sign, this very small local historic district called Welch's Mediterranean Row. Now, this is on 19th Avenue Northeast. Now, if you noticed, Andrew and I just crossed a street. We crossed First Street, and between east of First Street, the avenues change into northeast. So you can actually have an address that might be 365 17th Avenue Northeast, and you might have the same 365 17th Avenue North. And it can be very confusing for mailmen and for visitors coming to your house. But houses east of First Street are northeast. Houses west of First Street are north. So now we're on 19th Avenue Northeast. And this is a local historic district. I'll explain what that means in just a minute. But the short story is that it offers, when a neighborhood or a district or an area becomes a local historic district, it offers some protections against demolition or insensitive alterations to the outside of the homes in that district. And the reason, and we're going to just kind of slowly show these homes as we walk down, the reason that these 10 homes, they're all on the south side of 19th Avenue Northeast, were made into a district is they were all built at the same time between 1924 and 1925. A developer with the last name of Ray, he formed a company of the Ray Johnson Company. I haven't gathered whether he bought his land from Perry Snell, or if Perry Snell didn't originally own this portion of the Old Northeast. But the Ray Johnson Company was the developer. They hired an architect named C. Sedgwick Moss, who lived in St. Pete for about 10 years, and a builder named M.D. Welch. And they turned out these 10 houses very quickly between 1924 and 1925. They're all very similar. They were all 6 rooms, a detached garage. They all originally had a porch that took up about half, and this one still does, about half, unless this right side may have also been the porch that they've enclosed. A lot of them have enclosed the porch. I think that was probably the original porch. They all had a flat roof, and you could show Andrew at the top of this house, you can see it has a flat roof. It has a parapet, so it kind of, actually we'll come down here a little bit and show maybe this one has a better parapet. A parapet, I always think of a parapet as, if you've seen the Alamo, that little kind of round thing at the top is a parapet. So it kind of hides the roof line itself. But they all had a flat roof except for the last one on the block, and I'll talk about why. They all had a little porch. They all had this sort of Spanish Mediterranean revival style detailing on it. You can see the arched windows on this one, the clay tile roof, the kind of ornamental crests. And again, this one has the offset front porch, and this has little kind of balustrades that give that Spanish feel. Now this one's porch has been enclosed, you can see, but still it reads very much of a piece with these other houses. And these are built during a time of just, huge optimism in the 1920s. Life is good. This is before we have a huge boom between 1920 and 1926, and just a ton of building. The population increases in St. Pete from 14,000 to 40,000. So a huge population increase, tons of building. And again, a lot of it is, good morning. Hi. A lot of it is people building just winter residences, and they're spending the winter because they don't have air conditioning. Here's a really good example where you can still really see this sort of offset front porch. Now, the motivation for designating this as a local historic district, and actually, let's not get too far. Let me stand right here for a minute. The motivation for designating this as a local historic district, I'm guessing, is probably what you see across the street. And Andrew, if you turn for just a minute and see the 2 new construction houses, which actually I think are rather attractive. But what has been happening a lot in some of these historic neighborhoods of the Old Northeast, frequently they have larger lot sizes, and a lot of times these small older houses are being bought up, and maybe they'll even buy 2 lots. They're being demolished, and then huge houses that kind of dominate the property are being put in their place. And there's been some resistance to this in historic neighborhoods like the Old Northeast. The local ordinances have changed, in recent years that have made it slightly easier to designate a group of houses, or ideally you want a district to be larger, like an entire neighborhood, but it's become easier to designate them as a local historic district. Now, this is different than a national historic district, which actually the entire neighborhood of the Old Northeast is part of a national register historic district. That's an honorary designation. It doesn't offer any protection. When you become a local historic district, now the houses within this district have to, if they want to change the exterior of their house, if you want to do something inside, no problem. If you want to make a significant alteration to the outside of your house, you have to do a certificate of appropriateness. Most of them are kind of stamped in the Historic Preservation Office and advanced through. If it's a major alteration or a demolition, you'd have to go before a commission, and they could say, yay or nay as to whether you could do that. So the people, I think, in these houses who all gave their agreement to be part of this local historic district, in this case, you have to have 50% plus one of the owners in the district agree to put the application forward, and then the city decides whether or not it warrants a designation. But they're trying to prevent some future buyer from coming in and demolishing one of these. Great thing about it, and Andrew, shoot back this way real quick. One of the great things about Welch's Mediterranean Row is that you'll notice there's no driveways at all on this block here. Now, originally there would not have been driveways really anywhere in the Old Northeast. Everyone would have accessed their property from the backside in terms of the car access, and deliveries. They all would have come through your alley, your garage. In many instances, in places in the Old Northeast, for one reason or another, people have been granted a curb cut, is what it's called, and they'll allow a driveway to come in. Now, in the case of Welch's Mediterranean Row, there are no curb cuts, there's no driveways. You really have an amazing amount of continuity from what was originally here in Welch's Mediterranean Row. It really was screaming for protection to maintain it, because it really is unique. And when you walk it, you really feel it. I'd encourage you to come, take a look at it yourself. So this one house is a little bit different. It has a gabled roof, that kind of peaked, triangular roof. I love the owl sitting in the little alcove above the door. It's got the arched doorways. There's some speculation that this home may have been owned by the developer, Ray, though there's no evidence that he lived there. But so that house was done a little bit differently, but they were all designed by the same architect, same builder. And I think so MD Welch, who was the builder, designed 63 homes in 1 year during the boom, a lot of which are in this part of town. I think there's another one right up here. This house on our right here, as we continue down 19th Avenue, was originally built as a duplex. You can almost kind of see how that would be. You probably have a door here and a door here. It's been undergoing some renovation for quite some time, but it looks like they're actually getting going. I saw workers there this morning. We're going to hustle down to Locust Street. I want to point out a couple of houses along here. This cute little bungalow. I talked with the owner the other day, and she mentioned how, for many years it was rented out as like a guest house. The houses across the street, two of which have these really fantastic siding. Same thing. If you look up their addresses, so many of these houses in the Old Northeast, and really all of St. Petersburg, during the Depression, begin renting out. Either the entire home becomes apartments or a bed and breakfast, or they let out rooms. So you can find great advertisements for many of these houses. And Andrew, that house across the street there, 243, I think that's another MD Welch house. You can see it has that same parapet, small, probably also built during that same time. A lot of these houses, and John, go ahead and throw up those pictures of the streetcar. You still with me, John?
I am. Let me grab your streetcar pictures.
Did I miss anything? Were there any other pictures?
No, you're doing great.
In the interim? I don't think so. Okay. Thanks, John. I appreciate the enthusiasm.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for.
A lot of the houses, when they advertise these rooms to rent, they talk about their proximity to the streetcar line. And so it's something that I've done more and more research on. I find it really fascinating. So the streetcar came alternate, kind of interchangeably called a streetcar or a trolley. And I learned that the trolley is named for the trawler, which was the box that was hooked up to the cable that was electrified and would pull the car. That's called a trawler, and that's where the word trolley came from. We got them in St. Pete in 1905 when F.A. Davis, who kind of owned the electric company in town, started a streetcar service, an electric streetcar service. It's then bought by Walter Fuller, whose doors are in, or whose son's doors are in the home that we saw earlier. And he buys it basically so that he can run it out to Boca Ciega Bay and promote his housing developments out there. So he ends up running it, and John, I think you have that map, all the way down Central Avenue. So basically from, the bay on the east side, all the way out to Boca Ciega Bay on the west. And you're basically ferrying prospective buyers out there to look at property. When Perry Snell develops the Old Northeast, he says, that's a great idea. And he finances, he gives by this time the city has taken over the streetcar line, the city owns it. Perry Snell gives the city money to extend a rail of the streetcar line up Locust, which we're just about to turn on. So from downtown, you could ride it up Locust. We had streetcars running right through the middle of the neighborhood to Coffee Pot. And a fun thing about the streetcars is wherever they turned around, they needed room to do that. So you can still see, if you've ever driven down Locust and then notice that it makes a weird turn onto Coffee Pot Boulevard, that's because that's where the trolley was turning around. So lots of places in St. Pete that have these weird turns. The fun thing about the trolley lines is they weren't just for transportation. A lot of people were using them for activities, for excursions. And John, show some of those pictures, because the line that went down to Gulfport and the line that went out to the jungle were through like really jungle and tropical foliage. And so people would literally reach over and grab oranges off the trees. There's stories of people grabbing oranges off the trees while the streetcar is moving. In Gulfport, the fishermen would string their catch up along the front of the trolley to kind of advertise all the fish that they had caught as they were coming back into St. Pete, because everything was about promoting the good life here in St. Pete during the 1920s to get more people, to come to buy all these houses that we're building. So we're going to turn on Locust here. The trolleys enter a period of decline in the 30s because of automobiles and the gas-powered buses. During World War II, they become popular again because we have rationing of gasoline, we have rationing of rubber. But then after the war, they're becoming less and less popular, and they're totally taken out by it was either 47 or 49. And the last one had a sign on it that said dead, not dead, just retired, which unfortunately we know that it's still dead, but we do have the new Sunrunner line. So John, we're walking down Locust. We're going to turn on 18th Avenue and start looking at some of the Halloween decorations. Why don't you tell us how Halloween became such a big thing in the Old Northeast?
Sure. So, Halloween in the Old Northeast was a pretty normal affair well into the 90s. In the mid 90s, I was actually interviewing a woman for an article about her tree for the Northeast Journal. And she said, oh, we kind of helped start this thing. Cynthia Serra is a realtor down on 10th Avenue. She and some friends got dressed up as witches. They called themselves the Wicked Witches of the Old Northeast. And they went around and decorated a convertible and went around handing out candy. They kind of started a Halloween house decorating competition. They got the local neighborhood organization, HONA, involved. They got Smith and Associates, a realtor, and she was a realtor, of course, because, of course, a good St. Pete story has to start with a realtor. Smith and Associates sponsored a Halloween contest, so I think there were some prizes. And the first year they had 20 houses enter the contest. It ballooned to 200, and it became more and more elaborate. You get these you're going to see some really amazing Halloween decorations. But our neighbors across the street from where we live on 17th said, Dave grew up here, and he said, Halloween was normal. We used to get about 100, 150 trick-or-treaters on a good night. And then quickly it ballooned into the thousands. And literally, you used to buy a couple of bags of candy, and now people know, depending upon where they live, you need 1,000 to 2,000 pieces of candy. That's per and each kid's getting like one little Snickers bar or a Smartie,
Yeah.
or
And
or
you
a
can
double
see
bubble, or a dum dum.
or dum-dums, yeah. You can see there's a lot of people
Yeah,
gathered outside. This is one of the favorite
yeah.
houses
This
in the old
is
Northeast for decoration, and you can see why. So they have the aliens have landed. Now this spaceship, the one that's in the air, actually rises up and down. They have it on like a garage door motor, basically, and when they turn it on, it levitates. It goes up and down, and then they have dry ice and it blows in all the smoke. So this evening, yeah, they'll probably start at 4 or 5 o'clock, something like that. All the smoke will come in, and you can see the aliens in the cornfield. It's one of the most popular houses, and there will be people you can see. There's people over taking pictures to our right and left. It just brings people here in droves. And then the house next to it, which has had different themes over the years, but this year they've done Monsters Inc., which I have not seen that movie, but my children tell me that there's a part in it where the monsters go to different doors to different children's houses. And so apparently these are the doors through which the monsters go into people's houses. And each one of these little signs or doors was painted by a child in the neighborhood. And then this is the kind of logo for Monsters Inc. that the kids will recognize. So they're very excited. Across the street, we have here, let's actually go up a little closer to it, Andrew. This is, now we'll go up and film this is the clue to what this is, the Nautilus. We can tell how well read people are if they recognize what the Nautilus is. This is, of course, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the famous Jules Verne novel. And there's an inside, you can see this guy's harpooning the, what is it, squid, I think. Cool. Isn't it cool? And then inside there's a, yeah, here's the big squid, see? So I felt guilty because I actually haven't read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So then I had to read the synopsis of it so that I could get all of. Now this is a very, the family that lives there, they homeschool their 2 children. They're these brilliant people. So I know they know all about 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but I had to do a little cheat sheet. I had to do the Cliff's Notes on it today. Angela, let's walk back over. So John, you were saying piece of candy.
yeah,
we give out.
Yeah, we do what about 1,800 to 2,000, and we always run out. It's usually around 9 o'clock we have to shut our lights off, and actually we block the sidewalk so people can't even get to the door. And there's no like waiting for someone to ring the doorbell. People just get out to the front of their sidewalk, and it's almost like a steady stream of people.
And one of the kind of fun things is that this house that has the hearse, or no, actually I think it's jail now. It used to be a hearse. And this house changed hands.
Changed a little.
Changed hands recently, but I believe this contraption conveyed because this wagon thing has been used, although it has a different theme than it used to. We're gonna cross.
I guess when you move to another city, you don't need a full-size horse skeleton.
Yeah. Or a cotton candy machine, as was here in this house, I think, for several years. This one's great. This is a new decoration this year, and this is the home of Bob Glasser of Smith and Associates, and he was telling me the other day that this is a shotgun wedding. This guy has been left at the altar. Wait, the guy on the Andrew's not. So this guy has been left at the altar. The sign says "Explosive Wedding. Stay tuned for details." He's been left at the altar. His wife has found someone else, and that is what is happening over here. The parents are behind her. It's a very elaborate display, as are so many. We're going to cross over. This portion of 17th Avenue North, if you're going to come to the Old Northeast, this portion of 17th Avenue Northeast is blocked off, and there's police, so you can't drive on this portion. An insider's tip: in future years, if you want to come visit 16th, 17th, 18th are some of the busiest, most elaborate streets. 17th is closed off. Come the night before. So last night, here, we'll go up here and see the torture chamber that the kids like, and you can sit in here, I'll sit in the electric chair here. You can sit in the electric chair, or you can put your head through the guillotine. I'm not going to do that. They're doing unspeakable things on the table back there.
And
We're
at
gonna.
night, the lighting and the fog and the effects and their sounds. There's usually the owners are dressed accordingly
John, show
with
our house. Yeah,
oh
the
yeah,
people in between. Now we missed our house because we're one block up, but in between our house and the wedding that we just showed, there's a club.
a
It's all
nightclub,
skeletons at a nightclub, and there's a bar outside, and they actually have a DJ. Or the husband might be the DJ, but they have a big sound booth, and they have a big party, and it's everybody's welcome, and it's people get in. So, but show our house, John.
Yeah, I've got some pictures of our house. The first year we did the yellow brick road, which is on the left there. We stuck with movies for a while. We did one year was a haunted hotel. We did Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. We did the Goonies. Then we did a haunted campground. This year we have what's called the Boston Scare-a-thon. We have a bunch of skeletons because Monica runs marathons and she's running her third Boston next year. And I have to say, the Boston Scare-a-thon just a few minutes ago got shared by the Boston Athletic Association on Instagram.
Yay!
Yeah, Nick Marrero
awesome.
shared that it was on there. So the Boston Athletic Association picked up on our Boston Scare-a-thon decorations this year.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, we're standing in front of one of the best ones, and this has scared my daughter too many times to count. So this is the Old Northeast Orphanage, as you can see on the backs. The person wrapped up in the shroud is the headmaster. Don't worry, he's not dead, and we know this because he springs up on they have an electronic thing that makes him spring up suddenly, as do, I'm not sure which one of these. So these are the orphans, all in their creepy masks. One of them, I think it's this one. That's maybe this one. I shouldn't tell you this because then I'll ruin the surprise. But he pops forward like this, and the people that live here have a little controller. And when certain people walk by, they make him jump forward, and it scared our daughter as much as I've ever seen her scared in her life one year. So every year when we walk by, she has to walk right way over there. And then, of course, they have the former headmasters. This is the headmaster cemetery. Dr. I am here. My remains, bury me deep. You'll be here. These are all the headmasters that the orphanages have taken over. Now, in the evening, there will be a picture frame here with like a video screen of this changing face of the headmaster, and it is really creepy. So this is probably my favorite house in the Old Northeast. We're going to walk down and see just two more, and then we'll be finished. But again, it gets extremely hectic here on Halloween. I would recommend, if you ever want to come see the elaborate decorations in the Old Northeast, to come the night before. And
the
things
30th,
really picked up.
On the 30th, it looks like Halloween in any other neighborhood.
Yeah.
There's people out, and it looks like a regular Halloween.
Yeah, and these people have, and 18th has, I would say 18th is actually scarier. Like the decorations on 18th are scary. Although this is a little creepy. The spider with the baby doll.
Wrapped up in the spider web, yeah. You
Yeah,
got the Grateful Dead across the street. Don't miss
so
them.
We're gonna show the Grateful Dead, and then we'll finish up at this last house at the Greens house.
And these cars are probably Halloween lookers, right?
Yeah. Well, our street gets so much busier on Halloween than any other time of year. So you've got the Grateful Dead playing here. It's so good. And then across the street, so this house was actually just built, and I think they did a really lovely job for many, many years. This was an empty lot, and this is a family called the Greens. The husband is a very prominent ear, nose, and throat surgeon. He literally gives kids back their hearing that I've never heard before. It's really amazing. But they just built this house a couple years ago, and it fits in, I think, really well with the neighborhood. They have Jurassic Park, but it's all skeletons, and you can see the bones on the front porch, and they have crows sitting on them, and then these ones are hatching, and then something got out of this electric fence. We've got I don't know what those would be, pterodactyls or something. I don't know my dinosaurs well.
This is a velociraptor that has
okay, here's a velociraptor. Dinosaur. And then this is like Jurassic Park, we're on the little exploring it, and then the dinosaurs all get out. So and it's even better, of course, at night when everything's lit up. And you can see it says temporarily closed for construction. So it's a really great place to celebrate Halloween. You know, everyone's welcome. We have our candy prepared. We spend several $100s every year in candy for you. I hope we've shared a little bit about, you know, this is just 17th and 18th in the Old Northeast. There's lots to see. Like so many of our neighborhoods in St. Pete, there's just so much interesting history. Beautiful, you know, the houses are taken care of well now. There's the old and new come together in so many of our cool old historic neighborhoods. And we're happy to have you join us. Thanks again to the Downtown Partnership and all our sponsors. John, Isa, anything else you need to add?
Trick or
I think we're
treat.
good. This was fabulous.
Happy Halloween. Thanks for joining
Happy
us.
Halloween.
Bye, everybody.